Welcome to the Living Medicine podcast, where we talk about ethical medical use of psychedelic psychotherapy, teaching skills, examining the issues, and interviewing interesting people. Now let's start today's show.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Sandy Newis, and this is Living Medicine, the podcast where I interview interesting and influential people in the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy space and the adjacent psychedelic world. And I am the CEO of Living Medicine Institute, who sponsors the show. Living Medicine Institute is a business where we provide content, resources, and training to therapists and medical professionals interested in deepening or launching a career in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, focusing currently on ketamine. And today I am very excited to have Gina Giorgio. You know, I rarely speak your name out loud. Is that the right pronunciation? Giorgio?
Gina Giorgio.
Gina Giorgio, great. I am excited to have Gina Giorgio here. And Gina serves as Director of Strategy and Development at Students for Psychedelic Drug Policy, where she leads federal and drug policy reform initiatives. She lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and is very passionate about working at the intersection of policy, advocacy, communications, education, and coalition building to shift narratives and evidence-based drug policy across the United States. In 2021, Gina founded North Carolina's first statewide psychedelic advocacy coalition, now called Carolinas for Care. She serves on the North Carolina Institute of Medicine Task Force on Veterans Health and contributing to statewide recommendations in emerging mental health treatments. So that actually is exactly how I met you. So I always like to say that. So Gina and I met because suddenly I hear this call like, wait a minute, there's a North Carolina Psychedelic Policy Coalition? Because I too am really, really interested in, how policy intersects with treatment, and pretty mission driven in this work, as I've said over and over again. So I don't know, that started, I've probably been at it since maybe 2021.
The beginning, I think.
Since the beginning. And so I have witnessed you moving through this and, now really moving and morphing and holding these things with a great deal of care and professionalism. So I'm really grateful for all that you're doing. So thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate it. I'm so excited to be here. And I know that you've been involved with the advocacy for a while, but so consistently, and you're just the exact type of person that I love having in the coalition. And one of the main goals of the North Carolina Psychedelic Policy Coalition, now Carolinas for Care, was to really platform the therapists and the people that are actually doing the work. And so the policy is one of just the first pieces of how this is actually going to play out.
Well, it's the critical linchpin, though, right? Like without that, obviously, the rest of it never happens. So, it's critical. And for those who have not done any advocacy or policy, I've really learned a lot just about watching you and how you communicate with others and actually build coalitions and build relationship. And, there's so much to actually getting legislation passed or changed that's certainly not just like, let's just bombard people with facts and why this is really useful. That has limited utility without the relationship. Yeah. And tell us about your work. Like, how did you get involved with this? What kind of fuels your passion? I mean, we were talking, before we even started, how we're both just all into this. So, what is it? How'd you get into this, and what makes you be so, what leads your commitment to this?
It's a good question, and it goes pretty far back, actually. And there's a few key pieces to that, which even when I was really young, I had an interest in mental health. And so that was something that I pursued in school, but I was interested in how people's psychological experience shapes their decisions and the world around them. And we all have such an individual experience. But part of my interest in that was, how do we make that better for people? Not optimize it, but, how do we improve people's quality of life? And within my own life and my family specifically, I focus now on a lot of veterans advocacy, but I actually come from a veteran family. So I'm the youngest in my family. Youngest child syndrome. But when I was growing up, I lived within a few mile radius of my whole family. So both sets of my grandparents, all of my aunts and uncles, my mom, dad, siblings. So we were pretty close. And whenever we would go to my grandfather's house on my dad's side, he was a great storyteller, and he would tell us about his experiences in World War II. And I thought it was, fascinating. And of course, something that
Mm.
felt really far removed. Like he served in World War II when he was in his 20s and he was an engineer. And he would talk about going to England and France and all of the uh, hijinks that comes with that. But I noticed as I got older, I had a slightly different interpretation of his experience because he would tell us
Mm.
these stories, but he would also highlight that he would still dream about his experiences in World War II and have nightmares every single night. And he
Every
talked
night.
about every night. And, and when I was younger, he talked about that like it was normal. And then as I got older, I started to hear more people's stories like that and kind of how
Mm.
normal this veteran experience is,
Yeah.
but came to see how a lot of that untreated mental health and those traumatic experiences trickle down through a family. And
Right.
that is something that has fueled my own advocacy. So I love my family so much, but my grandfather went on to pass away without having any sort of treatment for his own condition or trauma. And I don't want that for other people.
Hmm. Interesting.
And yeah,
I mean, it's people just don't really realize the multi-generational impact of this. Like one of the little sidebars, I do veteran evaluation as part of my
okay.
clinical practice. And we still have people from Vietnam era coming in saying they've never talked about this and they are having nightmares every single night and they're having difficult relationships with their adult children. And there's, I mean, it's a multi-generational impact. So I love that you're highlighting that piece. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So this is all really timely. So, you and I cross paths at the Pearl Institute, the Bicycle Day Symposium, where you happen to be on a stage with Brian Hubbard and Michael Midhofer and some others who have been very influential in getting us to this moment, which happened to be the day after Trump signed the executive order, kind of essentially opening up psychedelic research and kind of clearing the lane, clearing away some of the obstacles. And, I get like a million emails like, yay, rah, rah, but there's still a long way to go, right? Like, so let's talk about that. Like, what does it do? What does it not do? And then kind of get into like, how did this even happen? Like, actually, like, I mean, well, let's talk about that. Like, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Because you and I have been part of this North Carolina Psychedelic Policy
Mhm.
Coalition for a while. There's ebbs,
Right.
there's flows, there's other things happening in other states. And then, like, all of a sudden, with the stroke of a pen, like, some of the obstacles have disappeared. Like, how did that even happen?
I'm glad you're asking this because you said at the beginning that you and I are kind of all in on this work. But I
Yeah.
have a particular interest in this specifically. So I got my master's in communications from Wake Forest University, where I researched how psychedelics are talked about in major news and looked at the
Mm.
trends over a 6-year period. I
Oh,
mean, this goes
interesting.
back far longer, but I had a timeline to work with. But I was interested in most recent events and how that shaped policy change. So
Mm.
obviously, psychedelic research was happening in the 50s and 60s. Prohibition, the Controlled Substances Act, put a lot of them into Schedule 1. And then psychedelic research started to emerge more in the early 2000s, specifically with Johns Hopkins University and their psilocybin research
Mm.
for cancer patients and anxiety, and then also the multi in MAPS. So, but obviously a barrier is this funding piece. You have
Mm.
to, for Schedule 1 substances, often pursue private funding just to get these studies going. But I think, the research has been helpful in validating this information. A lot of people don't read research papers, so I think a key piece of this is the media and how people are sharing their stories and experiences. And we've seen that really amp up over the past few years. And I think there's a lot of key people at play, but certain popular figures like Michael Pollan and his book, How to Change Your Mind, which was adapted into a 4-part Netflix series, Oprah interviewing Michael Pollan about psychedelics. And I mean, I think Joe Rogan also had some influence in this even years ago, and he's interviewing people specifically talking about DMT. But it's these people who we go to for information and entertainment. And then when they start talking about a taboo or stigmatized subject, it sort of start to change our mind when someone that you trust presents you
Mm.
with a different opinion. But aside from that, what was sort of happening at the same time was the policy shifts. So Oregon passing their Measure 109, creating regulated psilocybin access through their ballot measure. I'll name a couple of others, but Colorado, with their Natural Medicine Act, also created regulated access to psychedelics and decriminalized others. But one piece of policy that was surprising was that in 2021, the state of Texas passed the nation's first psychedelic research bill, which might not be as surprising in more liberal spaces, but people were surprised that it was Texas. And there's a few
Let me
things.
just kind of just let me interrupt you for 1 second
Sure.
because for anybody who's listening, what I'm hearing you doing is you're kind of giving sort of a summary of kind of legislation and policy shifts that have come up that are all fairly recent. And I
Right.
want to just highlight this piece about what you just said about Texas, because people often, if they're not tracking it very carefully, they're like, oh, it's like a liberal conservative issue, and it's not.
Right.
Like this is clearly a bipartisan issue that has both bipartisan support and bipartisan pushback. So, I
Sure.
mean, would you agree with that?
Completely. I mean, I think, and other people say this as well, that this is one of the most bipartisan issues that we're
Mhm.
seeing because we're not just saying, psychedelics are bipartisan, but it's that mental health care and the well-being
Right.
of our society is a bipartisan issue that it affects everyone.
Right. And I mean, that's an important distinction. Like, what we're really talking about is psychedelics, intentional use of psychedelics for mental health. We're not talking about like, let's open it all up so everybody can trip out. Like, it's not, that's a different conversation. Like, that's decriminalization and whether or not what laws should be exist and things like that.
Mhm.
But I want to just kind of clarify. Am I correct in saying like this mental health lane and the intentional use of psychedelics in the mental health lane is what we're talking about right now,
That
correct?
is what we're talking about.
Okay.
But I think that that is a core to what this shift was, which was
Yeah.
that psychedelics were seen through a recreational
Hmm.
rave lens. And we're not going to say that one lens is superior than the other. But people started to see, oh, psychedelics are used with licensed therapists in clinics. I've never heard of that before.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And
So thanks.
yeah,
I just wanted to kind of just hit that distinction. So back to what you said about Texas. So here we have Texas that's obviously, known to be a conservative state, and suddenly they're allowing psychedelics in,
mhm.
which kind of inherently burst that bubble that it's just a bunch of tripping hippies.
Right. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
I'm not saying there's not tripping hippies in Texas, but but it's different.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's something like this. It takes for some people so long to change their mind and change a paradigm around an idea. And so, even for me, I had grown up thinking that psychedelics were just a solely hippie activity. I hadn't seen or heard a different perspective, but it was through hearing other people's experiences when they took a psychedelic that from what I was hearing, I was like, oh, that was a therapeutic or a spiritual or a health changing experience, whether that was the intention or not. And for a lot of
Mhm.
people, that's how it plays out to be. And so
Mhm.
it was clear to me the potential medical utility.
Right. Good. So, kind of the medical utility, we've got several different pieces of legislation, brings us up to Texas. Texas was a significant opening. What year did that happen again? Like, not long.
2021.
Right. So, it's been
And
a minute. It's been a minute. So we've got these different things that are opening up, psychedelic research. There are clinics happening in Oregon. There are clinics happening in Colorado. Those are still correct. Those are still the only legal places where people can go to a clinic and the above ground. There's some other states that have decriminalization, which means that people aren't going to get arrested for it necessarily,
yeah,
right? Am I tracking that correctly?
that is true. But New Mexico also passed legislation to create a medical psilocybin program, but they haven't opened clinics yet.
Great. I mean, and then there were some bills. I know
Yeah.
Massachusetts had one, and there's some other ones that didn't make it through. So this is not just like a
No.
linear progression. So, fast forward to 2026. Was that just last weekend? The weekend before last?
April 18th. Yeah.
April 18th. Today is May 4th when we're doing this interview. And suddenly there's this big buzz like, wait a minute, what just happened? So, how did we get to that moment?
I would say that at the core of how this has changed is people started to seek out different treatments for themselves. And
Mhm.
so we talk about our current treatments, talk therapy, and SSRIs, but for a lot of people, they were seeking something else. And I mean, honestly, a core to how the advocacy has shifted has been specifically for veteran populations. So some of
Mm.
your world's, toughest people are now kind of coming out of the woodwork and saying that they're still dealing with their symptoms of TBI, PTSD for decades after they've served. Nothing has worked for them. They've been put on dozens of medications. They have all sorts of symptoms. And I think that fueled a lot of this, but also the veteran suicide epidemic. So more
Mm.
veterans have committed suicide than have actually passed away while they were serving overseas. And so we're
Wow.
seeing
Well, can we
this.
just repeat that? Could you just
Yeah.
repeat that out loud again? Because that's an important thing for people to understand and to realize. Just say that again, and let's all just let that soak in because that's a really big thing.
Yeah, more veterans have committed suicide back home than who died of casualty overseas.
I mean, that's absolutely huge. Like every veteran I talk to has lost person after person in their life to suicide. Is it to the point where they just talk about it like as if it's normal? Like, oh yeah, and then my friend this person, and I mean, just really thinking
Yeah.
about the impact of that. That's a huge thing that says that these veterans are suffering. And there are lots of other people that are suffering too from trauma and PTSD, but let's just name that. So that particular piece getting a lot of publicity. I know that there's documentaries and there's some very, very outspoken veterans advocates and veterans advocates
Mhm.
group. And I imagine on some level, you're at least kind of tracking and kind of working to create relationships with all of the groups. Is that, I mean, some of them are occupying in their own silos, some of them are occupying differently. So there's this momentum. I mean, is that ultimately what it was? And then some key people getting kind of the ear of the right people in the administration.
That's what I would say. So there's various groups, a lot of them are veteran focused nonprofits that do this advocacy in DC. And then the emergence of certain political figures. So former Governor Rick Perry becoming, I would say, an advocate for Ibogaine and being on Joe Rogan and speaking about that twice and partnering with Brian Hubbard. And then also Congressman Luttrell. So he was
Mm.
one of the people standing behind President Trump during the signing. We could also say potentially, I'm not sure if you know Matt Zorn. He has sued the DEA, but now actually works as an attorney for HHS.
Oh, interesting.
And so I would say, yeah, I mean, key people that got close to the administration or are close to the agencies or work for the agencies have been bringing this up more. Obviously, we know Kennedy has been an outspoken supporter for psychedelics. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, this building of momentum. And I think it takes that collective applied pressure to really move something like this.
Good. Well, and I think it's a really interesting lesson for anybody who's interested in advocacy on any level, because from my perspective, I've witnessed this momentum. I mean, I witnessed the MDMA research from a psychotherapy outcome research methodology was stellar. I mean, I could poke some,
Yeah.
critiques at it, but that got just kind of like brushed aside with like, oh, it's dangerous. And yet there are almost no adverse events. And yet here we have like Ibogaine, of which there are adverse events, public
Mhm.
service announcement. Everybody should know Ibogaine can have heart issues.
Yeah.
It's really important to use it in a way that there's medical support on site and careful screening. Doesn't mean it's bad, just mean be careful,
Mhm.
like, so it's all these kind of balls in the air and it's not following like a linear progression following the
Yeah.
research. There's a lot of relationship building, coalition building. And then, I mean, I'm like a fan of Brian Hubbard and the way that he's like the psychedelic orator.
Yeah.
You put like a Kentucky orator kind of on
Right.
the stage, and you got something going at this particular moment in time. So thank you, Brian, for that. um, so yeah, so okay, so it's a lot of things, and then all of a sudden it happens. Like, did you see this coming?
I had heard whispers a couple of days before that there was something happening with Ibogaine. And when I saw Brian Hubbard and former Governor Rick Perry were on Joe Rogan a couple weeks before, thought the timing was interesting. And my guess was that they were asking for a meeting with President Trump because they were just on the podcast about a year prior. And I thought, there's got to be some big reason that they would go back. I mean, a couple of Ibogaine bills have passed this year. To your
Mm,
point, like not all of them have passed. This has not been linear. I think it's been Mississippi and Arizona have
right.
passed bills, but in certain places they've been vetoed. I had heard whispers, but I saw for certain that morning. And I remember it so clearly. I was sitting looking at my phone. I almost didn't believe what I was actually watching.
Right. No, I know. I was
Yeah.
like, I mean, you might have probably got like insider scoop, but I got it pretty quickly. I was like, wait a minute, what? Did this just happen? Like, okay,
But
all right.
especially, I mean, people are surprised that it's ibogaine of all things, but that doesn't come with some of the stigma and baggage that other psychedelics have come with. But I mean, people have been advocating for MDMA approval for 40 years, and
Yeah,
ibogaine has been such a small portion of that
totally.
time.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think we were expecting that either.
No, it's interesting. I mean, that's, the nuances of all of that is something just interesting for people to track. And so, okay, so let's get into the like, no, what does this mean? So, first of
Yeah.
all, can you say what it is? What is this mystical executive order? And then let's talk about, what does this mean for the states and, you know,
Yeah.
North Carolina, where we're from, but really for all the states, like how does this roll out? What is it? How does this roll out? What is this? What are the implications for the states?
That's what I'm most excited about is how this plays out on the state level. So the executive order does five things and directs those objectives to six agencies.
Okay, so
So
these
that's
five things. So let's kind of name that. There's five things. So I'm only highlighting that just so that, for
yeah.
people who are listening, this is what it does.
Yeah, and we'll kind of, maybe do a high level and then we'll trickle down narrow to more specifics and just some
Okay,
action steps for
great.
people and therapists. So this will impact six federal agencies: FDA, DOJ, DEA, HHS, VA, and ARPA-H.
Okay. What's
And one
ARBA
of
H?
what was that?
What's ARBA H?
ARPA-H is funded through HHS, and that is the entity that is providing the $50 million in funding, at least $50 million in clinical trial funding towards states. And they've
Okay,
actually
great.
already begun to do this. They made an announcement a few days ago that they would provide funding for psychedelic research, Johns Hopkins, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and University of Southern California.
Mm,
So there's already a
awesome.
couple things that have happened since the executive order, those things. And then also the FDA commissioner gave out three national priority vouchers: Compass Pathways, Usona, and Otsuka.
Mm-hmm.
So that is for two psilocybin similar compounds and one compound similar to MDMA. It's called methylone.
Uh-huh.
And essentially what that would do is, because these compounds are, closer to FDA approval, it would
Mm,
put their application towards the front of the line. So instead of having a 10 to 12 month review process, that could be narrowed down to 1 to 2 years. Sorry,
mm.
not 1 to 2 years, 1 to 2 months.
Amazing. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would imagine then on some level, because one of the reasons why the MDMA didn't pass was because it was the first compound that had been released with therapy as an integral piece of the equation. And in my opinion, the FDA didn't have any psychotherapy outcome researchers. They're used to
Right.
evaluating drugs. So does that then mean that there would be an increased openness to the therapeutic side of that? Or is that more just the specific impact of the compound itself?
So for MDMA, yeah, for MAPS's MDMA, they've been pushing for that specific therapy component with Compass Pathways. I like to use that as an example just because they're, also furthest along. They outline comparing Comp 360, which is their patented version of psilocybin, with psychological support and
Mm,
monitoring. So my sense is that they won't require a therapist or a specific therapy protocol, but that they advise that you have someone who checks in on you and provides psychological support. They outline that this is to increase accessibility. So
mm,
they feel that
mhm,
having a licensed therapist would be cost prohibitive for people.
mm, mhm. Okay, which it could very well be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's legitimate. So it's a separate conversation about that. Okay. Okay. So a couple things are fast tracked. It's happening. Like
Yeah.
we're talking about like less than a month, and there's already been vouchers released. There's already been funding granted.
Yeah.
And so it's happening. Like it's
Yeah.
like people are poised and ready for this. This is not a brand new thing.
Mhm.
People didn't really see it coming, but there's organizations that have been poised to kind of jump into that gap.
Yeah. And there's a couple other things that happen short and long term. So, one that I'm excited about, and I hope we see some movement on, is the right to try component.
Oh,
So,
yes.
in terms of right to try, federally, that's a law that allows for physicians to administer investigational new drugs to patients with life-threatening conditions. So that also includes PTSD, although it usually is for cancer patients and these
Mm.
special cancer drugs. But the problem is that right to try doesn't allow for access to Schedule 1 substances, which most psychedelics are. And so there is actually a bill called the Freedom to Heal Act that would create a registration process through the DEA. So physicians could register, this hasn't been passed, but physicians could register to administer Schedule 1 substances. So ideally, this executive order similar to that would create an actual pathway so physicians could work with Schedule 1 substances for patients with life-threatening conditions. And that's something we could potentially see in the near term.
Oh, interesting. So
Yeah.
that kind of punts it back to the individual physicians, takes it
Mhm.
away from the organizations, puts it back to the
Yeah.
physicians. So a physician that I work with could become, licensed, could go through whatever procedures so that they can administer this. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And life-threatening conditions are not just necessarily like terminal cancer and things like that, but also significant mental health issues such as PTSD.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Okay. So we got the research piece, we got the opening of the lane, we've got funding piece, we've got the right to try piece, which that is what I'm hearing is that one is the one that's the most likely to have an immediate impact on an individual level. Is that accurate? Like meaning like clinics like that's the lens I
Yeah.
have. Like takes it out of the like big pharma lane and the academic university lane and opens it to individual providers. Is that
Outside of like a clinical research setting. So if
yeah.
we get that Schedule 1 authorization sooner, that could be an immediate treatment pathway.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. All right. And are there more?
There's a couple of other things.
Okay.
One is there was a provision to increase data sharing between the VA and HHS. So trying to combine clinical trial data to also put towards the FDA applications. But they are looking more at not just clinical trial data, but real world data. So Oregon
Mhm.
is starting to do this more. How are people responding outside of a clinical trial setting? Um, and then one more thing, of course, is once psychedelics potentially receive FDA approval, they need to be rescheduled. And so this would create a potentially expedited pathway. I mentioned that kind of timeline of 10 to 12-month review that could be narrowed down to a couple months to reschedule
Hmm.
psychedelics. But I will give, just to debunk what I think might play out, is that Compass Pathways is seeking FDA approval of their patented Comp 360. It's likely that that will receive a lower scheduling status, but it's to be determined if psilocybin, that natural compound, will also be rescheduled. So this could result in something called bifurcated scheduling, where the patented version of the substance is rescheduled, but that original substance stays Schedule 1.
I can't help but laugh.
I'm seeing
I'm
your
like,
reaction right now.
okay, so we get to take the like super expensive research compound and put that at a lower, but this like fungus that grows naturally that people have been using for thousands of years, like that still stays at the like that you can like grow in your backyard. Like that still stays at the highest level potentially. I'm not saying that's good or
Yeah,
bad. It's just interesting. Like it just kind of speaks to the like where private sector business meets research meets
right.
approval kind of process. So let's just name that. Hmm.
Well, I'll be curious because if a lot of people's main concerns is true accessibility, then I would hope that they would value the actions that actually result in that, which is that psilocybin will likely be less expensive than its patented version.
Right, you would
Yeah.
think. All right. Interesting. Okay. And I want to kind of highlight too the importance of this centralized database because one of the things that I came in with an assumption that there was some centralized database in the sky, like at least linking together all the different VAs or different
Yeah.
clinical research sites, and there's not. And like so everybody's been operating in their own silos, so this kind of mandate or whatever that is, like funding or whatever, I
Right.
don't know what we would call it, like push to create a
Mm.
centralized database where data can be shared is actually really big.
That's been really spearheaded also by Americans for Ibogaine, which Brian Hubbard is the CEO of, which is that when
Uh-huh.
they passed that $50 million Ibogaine bill in Texas last year, it would create this public-private partnership, but they're creating this Ibogaine consortium. So if other states pass an Ibogaine bill, they're trying to pass similar ones. All of the data they're collecting from the states could go towards the same application.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Because I mean, back in the day when I was involved in research, like practice research networks were a really big deal, which would require a large enough sample size to get past some of the methodological concerns if you don't have like extremely well-controlled studies that match
Mhm.
exactly
Right.
the same methodology but you can utilize a larger sample in order to get data, right? Am I with you? I mean, are you with me so far? Get valid data in a cross sample kind of way. I don't know if I said that exactly right, but is
Yeah.
that part of it? Like we're trying to just bring in like more data collection sites?
More data and to, congregate that data. And research, of course, is so expensive. And this is to help
Right.
try to just offset the millions of dollars or hundreds of millions that it can take to get a drug through FDA approval. I
Hmm.
come from a bit of a research background. I used to work in a genetics research lab and worked
Oh,
in
interesting.
clinical research, in an emergency medicine department and did research in college. So research is so finite that I am personally curious how they're going to do this because when it comes to actually doing like a statistical analysis and trying to get a result, how easily can you do that when research was done in completely different conditions across the country?
Right. Well, I mean, one of the things I've talked about here briefly, but is just like I was trained to do in adventure therapy world, which
Right.
actually, as much as it does not sound similar, it is. And that was the same thing, like aggregate data across sites, like how do you control for methodological variability and all of the different
Right.
variability that, happens with that. And, that's it's not a perfect world, but without
Right.
that, we just limit it all to like labs. Um, and then it loses its real world utility. So, seeking that sweet spot is important.
Right. I think it's becoming increasingly clear that obviously this is something that hasn't necessarily been done before in this exact way. And it seems like parameters are shifting for this type of treatment. So now we're trying
Mhm.
to aggregate data. In terms of the clinical trials, there's a lot of critiques of the double-blind, placebo-controlled method and the, notion that you can't truly control or, have a placebo compared to a psychedelic, and that experience can be pretty definitive. So I'm curious, how much will we change some of the standards around clinical trials when it comes to psychedelics
Right.
itself?
I mean, but that, like that again, in the psychotherapy outcome, there's like a whole literature on those like expectancy effects. And,
Yeah,
as you go in and, are you going to assume that the treatment is helpful for you? Are
right.
you aware of the fact that you're in the control group versus not? Like you can't do outcome research where you do interventions with humans without
Mhm.
them knowing if it's obviously different. It just can't be done.
Right,
And so, controlling for that in terms of statistical analysis and things like that, there's a whole literature on that. And I keep being like,
right,
hey, y'all, there's like a whole thing going on over here that people seem to not look at. Because I get that it's not part of the drug development. In fact, we want to control for that. So that, I mean, it's just interesting. Um, all right. Well, so okay. So we've got this thing going on. And you know, what's going to happen at the state level? And then let's get into the gaps about preparedness and implementation. And do we have any concerns? Let's kind of get into that piece.
So a next piece for states and, individuals who are licensed in this space is that I mentioned ARPA-H at the beginning that will be administering that at least $50 million, dollars, and they've already begun to do so, is that they will create an outline for people to apply for those funds. So that can be existing research programs and also new ones. So I encourage people to regularly look at the ARPA-H site to see when they release an application for people to apply for funds.
Hmm.
Something that we've done specifically in North Carolina, I'm making this announcement right now. We actually introduced a new psychedelic bill last week.
Oh, nice.
It's Senate
Good job.
Bill It's Senate Bill 1018. It's called the HEAL Act, and it's a bipartisan bill. And it's similar to what we've introduced in the past. It includes a task force, so people to advise on access and implementation, but also creates a breakthrough therapies grant fund so
Oh.
that the state can put funds towards research with it outlines MDMA, psilocybin, and ibogaine, but it also directs the state to look for sources of federal funding. So we specifically cite the president's executive order in that element of it.
So did the executive order, did that shift? I mean, I'm aware that this bill has been in the works, some version of this bill has been in the works,
Mhm.
but did the executive order change it significantly?
I wouldn't say significantly because we've been on that same path of, wanting more research funds, and I'm specifically interested in the preparation before FDA approval, but this
Mhm.
creates a potential pathway for more funding if the federal government will match our proposed state funding element. I think one of the main things that it does is it gives, a federal stamp of approval from the president of all people. So when we go into meetings, I'll speak specifically on North Carolina. We've been garnering some legislative support for the past 4 or so years, but there is some pushback saying that the federal government has not recognized this as a treatment, is what certain people say. So now this is just helpful momentum to build on, and we can point to and say, okay, the president of the United States has now endorsed looking into this as a treatment option.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, that kind of like, I'm like, if we're going to really dig into the hairs, right? Like the nuances of this, we're actually
Mhm.
not talking about it as a treatment option, not at least on a mental health. We're talking about it. Well, okay, this is me being a psychologist. I'm like,
Okay,
treatment to
yeah.
me is therapy, right?
Mhm.
This is medication. So I think that's an important distinction. Am I correct? Like we're now gone fully back into the lane about this being a medication, an experientially oriented medication,
Mhm.
and that the therapy side of that is separate from that. Is that accurate?
I think that this is to be determined, but I
Okay,
think that
interesting.
we will see both. But I mean, I imagine that people like you and a lot of the therapists that we know, the main thing that they harp on is the importance of the therapy component. Continually, I hear this all the time that it's not the same as just doing the psychedelic. I mean, in
Okay.
establishing a relationship with your therapist before, during, but especially after is when the real work and the integration comes in. I actually toured one of the psilocybin clinics in Oregon,
Hmm.
and that is not therapy, that's regulated access. So you have a facilitator, but it's not necessarily like you're going for a certain condition.
Hmm.
And the owner of that clinic told me that the majority of times what they see is someone comes in, gets the psilocybin experience, and then they never come back. And I think
Interesting.
that that's a possibility of, yeah, I mean, I don't know if everywhere is going to mandate treatment, but I imagine that certain clinics will set up their own package or protocol.
Right. Well, and that's the interesting thing about this, once it moves into the private sector, at that point, then it becomes consumer driven. And we often think
Yeah.
about that as being like bad, but that's an access piece as well.
Hmm.
And then that kind of gets me into that thing that, you and I were mentioning, and I've said like this therapy versus therapeutic, like
Right.
therapy, preparation, work during the medicine and integration or some, mostly that version of that with a licensed therapist is not the same as a therapeutically oriented experience, which can be
Hmm.
utterly life altering. It's just not therapy. And it
Yeah.
becomes relevant when we talk about like regulation and model building and
Right.
standardization. Um, and, it's just an interesting distinction. So you're saying that those people are going to the psilocybin center and they're not seeing them anymore. So we don't actually know, like, are they having like such a profound life altering effect that they're like
Yeah.
done? Are they going on and thinking their own therapeutic support, or are they having adverse events and are afraid to come out and talk about that? We don't know.
We don't know. And
Interesting.
not in all circumstances. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so, that just kind of highlights the importance of like us really thinking about these things in, kind of both broad and specific ways. So, what are your thoughts on where we're at in terms of preparedness? What needs to happen for implementation? Do we need training? Is there going to be additional regulation? What
Right.
about access?
It's become increasingly clear that this regulation process is going to take multi years. So, Oregon and Colorado are changing their regulations all the time. I mean, to
Mm-hmm.
make this easier for other states, I think we should start looking at what other states have done and the regulations that they've set up, their training programs. Of course, a key piece here is insurance coverage. So at least we're seeing ketamine is now being covered by certain companies as a workplace benefit, but that insurance and Medicaid coverage is huge. Starting to consider, what spaces and areas are authorized to administer psychedelics. And I think it's still up in the air, to your point, who is, and the states are ultimately going to decide a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
This is why, to me, advocacy is so important because I imagine, and this has been my stance since I started the coalition, is that this could play out on its own. Psychedelic treatment experience, it could be in the hands of the state, play out on its own. I think we have a much higher likelihood of success if the people who are actually trained and experienced with these psychedelics are involved in that decision-making process. And that's really my ultimate goal is that I don't want us to just have a seat at the table, but we've, at least in the state of North Carolina, have actually been creating the table. We've,
Mm-hmm.
helped written the bills so far and made the relationship so that when we move closer to implementation, we are the people that some of these agencies are actually seeking out for information.
Interesting. Just real quick, do we have particular, people in Congress in North Carolina specifically to thank? Are there people that we should contact? For those that are interested in advocacy, this is
Yeah.
kind of a plug for action.
So on the congressional side, Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina, I think he was the first Republican to be outspoken in support of psychedelics.
Nice.
So I don't think he's running for re-election, but I mean, thank people like that. Our bill sponsors for this current Senate bill are Senator Brinson and Senator Sophia Chitlick. And then we've had, also on the House side, a lot of people to support. And so this sounds so cliche, but I do always encourage people to reach out to their representatives and senators because it takes that compounding of information and touch points to your representative to actually motivate them to act.
Right. I mean, so if I'm hearing you correctly, um, we just don't know. Like, is there going to be training required? What's that going to look like? Like, is there going to be insurance coverage? What's that going to look like? I mean, let's just put a plug for that. Like, something that's of
Yeah.
interest is that, from my perspective, is without insurance coverage, like we're looking at, a 6+, if we're looking at psilocybin,
Mhm.
MDMA, even if it's synthetic psilocybin, ibogaine is really long acting. Like these are long
Right.
acting experiences. So that require a degree of supervision and a space to do them. And so people just need to understand that we're not just talking about like, go do it in your home.
Right.
So that in and of itself is going to be incredibly expensive. And that doesn't even include having a therapist involved on any level. We're just
Right.
talking about time, facility, general care and supervision.
Hmm.
So access becomes a really important piece of this equation, which to me inherently almost leads us to insurance. I mean, is that accurate?
Yeah, and to your point, people are trying to get or address this in different ways. There's that concept of having group therapy. So can you monitor
Mm.
multiple people at once? And I'm sure some people might prefer that group therapy component, but there are certain groups and organizations whose main focus is to focus on the Medicaid coverage of psychedelics
Mm, mhm,
specifically.
mm.
So it's something that people have an eye on. And I would say that's one of the top priorities
Good.
is insurance coverage.
Well, and then I will just name, working in ketamine,
Right.
which is almost all private pay. There's also an interesting barricade that people don't realize is that for businesses, clinics, businesses that are making, good money in the
Mhm.
private sector for people who don't have insurance, they are not always particularly motivated to support insurance. Right. Like, so it's like, it's again, we've got this consumer kind of hierarchical layering here that the people who are actually doing it and have the funds to be able to do it may not be those motivated to help expand access. Because if they can make a living doing what they're doing and getting paid at the rate that they're asking and they're making it work, then they might just not be involved. If not block it, they might just not be involved in that discussion. So it's an interesting nuance that's important to understand.
Completely. And for states and a lot of the therapists that you probably know, helpful to at least consider becoming a community care partner with the VA.
Mm.
So the VA
Mhm.
can cover some care costs for
Okay.
patients. And so the
Okay.
Pearl Institute in Waynesville, who's also a ketamine clinic, they're a community care partner with the VA. Derive Health, which is a ketamine clinic in Charlotte, is pursuing that same avenue. And then they're working with a group who is it's I don't think it's the VA, but they are covering the costs of veterans to come to Derive specifically for care. So
Nice.
there's interesting avenues that can be worked here.
Okay. All right. So is it okay if we take just another couple minutes?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about just because training is pretty
Yeah.
near and dear to my heart. What are
Mhm.
your thoughts on training? And then just like tell me what excites you about this, what terrifies you about this, and then, how do people find you?
Yeah, so I spoke about training at the United Nations recently, and so through the
You went to
organization.
the United Nations? Okay. Just like, yeah, I was at the United Nations talking about training for psychedelics.
Let's talk about it. Let's
Okay.
I'm
Awesome.
glad you asked.
What did the UN have to say about training for psychedelics?
I'd be curious your thoughts too. So we have, provisions for people to work with psychedelics in clinical trials, but not in training contexts. So when a lot of, and I assume this is your experience, except for ketamine, when you're training with MDMA or psilocybin, you can do the protocol, but you can't actually work with that compound itself. Obviously, it's not legal. And so, what my testimony to the United Nations was, this was in Vienna, and it's their Commission on Narcotic Drugs. So, they
Amazing.
evaluate drug scheduling.
Can I
And
come
so,
next time? I'll put on my doctor shoes. I'll refer to myself as Dr. Newis instead of
come
just
next time. Yeah.
Sandy.
Well, they do it every year.
I could do it.
But so, I mean, organizations can seek consultative status with the United Nations. So if you
Oh,
fill out that process, it took SSDP a few years to get accepted to have consultative status, but then you can go to UN events and weigh in on their agenda. And so I weighed in on it was like an agenda item about increasing, medical and scientific utility while preventing drug diversion. And so I proposed that the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs consider expanding pathways for therapists or physicians to train with psychedelics. So if people can administer psychedelics in clinical trials, we should potentially allow them to train with the psychedelic in like approved training contexts. Because once we get to approval, we will have a complete shortage of people through that pipeline that are ready to work with the medicine itself.
Right. I mean, that's something that people is important for people to understand is that like I believe that the skills that I know and learn and use with ketamine and that we teach are applicable. And yet, when we're looking at, significant like regulatory processes that may be very rigid, could be wide open, we just don't know,
Mm.
and this piece, like, how does a practitioner who's going to be a clinician to work with it, much less one who's going to train other clinicians, what level of experience do you need to have yourself
Yeah.
with the medicine and the particular model that you'll be working in is really kind of, it sounds so obvious. We're like, yeah, of course you would need that, but that's not the view for everybody.
Mhm.
So,
In
okay.
Texas, they actually, I'll add one thing. Texas changed their law this year that they actually now require a physician to be on site in ketamine clinics.
Right. Yes. Which is not great for people like me.
Yeah.
And of all the medicines that we may or may not need that with, it seems like ketamine is
Yeah.
super safe. But that's a kind of that's also a really interesting example that people just need to be tracking, specifically the therapists who are not licensed medical professionals. Like this
Right.
would be a good time to develop a partnership or just a relationship with
Right.
somebody in a prescriber role, at least even informally, if this is part of what you're kind of
Mhm.
tracking. So we
And
all just need to be on top of this because we don't
right.
really know.
And it seems like it's going in the direction of having some type of licensed health professional and potentially nurses present as well, especially things like ibogaine or ketamine. And then certain states may require a physician to be present on site, which I know is cost prohibitive for a lot of clinics themselves. And so in Oregon, I think over a dozen psilocybin clinics have actually closed, and that's for a variety
Okay.
of reasons. But
Yeah.
Oregon has gone through its own
Right.
hookups or hiccups in trying to
Yeah.
just expand access to their psilocybin. But I'd be curious from you, I mean, just if you had one main thing that you were thinking about in terms of training, what's top of
Hmm.
mind for you?
I mean, I think that it's so we've got the therapy versus therapeutic,
Hmm.
right? Like, so, in the therapeutic side, it's the critical importance of set and setting and
Yeah.
trauma informed care. Like,
Mhm.
SAMHSA has actually, in like treatment models of in all domains, non-psychedelics, has released kind of the core tenets of trauma-informed care. And every single psychedelic center should have like very well grounded in trauma-informed care. And that's therapy versus therapeutic. Set and
Right.
setting, patient care, not just safety, but like emotional, physical safety, multicultural
Right.
safety, attending to the person's needs. Like safety is going to activate a nervous system in a way that is going to engage defensive processes. Those are the very same processes that we're trying to work with are going to be engaged if we don't attend to safety, and that can cause harm. So those are of critical importance. And then on the therapy side, understanding that we're really working with the synergy of the
Mhm.
non-ordinary state and
Right.
psychotherapy. And that has both similarities and is also different. And so understanding that preparation medicine and integration are really three different processes, and the
Yeah.
importance of relationship and kind of some of those core relational elements, as well as case conceptualization. Like that's a missing link. And so often in psychedelics, like, are we actually looking at our clients from the lens of, their sense of self and their psychology and how that
Right.
is made up? And then we tailoring their interventions accordingly. So those are kind of, some basic things that I feel really strongly about across settings.
Yeah. To
Um,
your point, and I want to just highlight one of the main gaps I see, which is less what's happening during the experience and more what's happening after. And
yeah,
so
thank you.
a
Yeah,
lot of these psychedelics are opening a critical window period for people. So they're more sensitive, there's more metaplasticity, neuroplasticity, there's increased sensitivity that's happening the weeks after the treatment, where now they're being likely put back into their normal environment. And that's why I enjoyed the clinic model, because a lot of the clinics, like yours and others across the state, have created their own senses of community So it's
Totally.
not like someone does this treatment, goes back to their normal environment, but ideally they can seek out some of these like peer support or can talk to their friends about it, or through their ketamine clinic, maybe there's some type of integration group. And
Yep.
so we're not just talking about like a one-time treatment, but to me, we're really changing the culture around what care and wellness can actually look like.
Well, and that's where like bringing in the trauma-informed care tenets, like they're just
Mhm.
listed. Look it up. SAMHSA, core tenets of trauma-informed care. Like they're available, they're accessible, and they're very, very good guides. And they sound very straightforward, but if you permeate those throughout. So um, all right, well, kind of last words, like how do
Yeah.
people find you? What's the next step on your agenda? Like what's
Yeah.
happening next?
You can find me at, Gina Giorgio on social media or also carolinasforcare.org. I mentioned we're relaunching and rebranding and forming from a coalition to a 501(c)(3) this year. So find us at carolinasforcare.org and also on social media. But really, my main focus. So, with the timing of the executive order, North Carolina actually started their legislative session 3 days after that. And so for us, it's full steam ahead. We're building on the momentum and the education. And to me, it's less about the policy, but it's more about just starting to have more educational conversations with some of our higher ups about the issue, but also the public. I think people are probably surprised to see a executive order like this. And so it's a long-term educational initiative, and we're going to start
Right.
working on that more this year.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gina. So I'll just put a plug for everybody, whether you're in North Carolina or any state, just pay attention, get involved in the state level, because it sounds to
Yeah.
me like what's coming is that this is going to come to the states.
Yes,
Like
that's
that
true.
the states are ultimately going to be kind of, crafting the day to day. So attend to it on the state level. So thank you so much. I
Yes,
appreciate your
thank you.
wisdom. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate the fact that you went to the UN. I appreciate the way you're holding this with such, grace and humility and,
Thank you.
wisdom and heart. So thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Thank you
All
for having
right.
me.
Take care. Bye-bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Thanks for listening to Living Medicine. We'll see you again next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.